Doom 2016 is responsible for rebooting the franchise as we know it. It could have gone the way of the modern day shooters by just being bad. Instead, it brought the game back to its roots, which ironically allowed it to thrive in the modern scene. Fast movement, item pickups, secrets, that flippin' music. Reject modernity, embrace tradition. And this struck a chord with gamers, which is easy to see with Doom's resurgence in pop culture, and by that I mean meme culture. So it was to no surprise to see Doom Eternal's review score was on par with the original. I don't throw the term perfect sequel around lightly, but Doom Eternal is certainly one of them. But what makes a sequel perfect? There are a few things you have to deliver on. Number one is pretty obvious, you gotta improve the gameplay. You don't have to make it too different. You want the core experience to stay relatively the same, but a sequel has to shake things up in meaningful ways. Half-Life 1 is pretty simple. You got your gun, so you run around shooting the bad guys. That's it more or less. Half-Life 2 on the other hand makes things complex with the addition of physics, which is quite broad, I know. Puzzles, the gravity gun, all of this utilizes the technology perfectly. No longer are you just shooting at enemies, now you're throwing swords at them to cut them in half. No longer can you just look at a character, but now you can pose them however you want. Wait, this is the same game, right? Doom 2016 had a lot going on, but I think the main draw was easily the movement. It's a huge part of Doom's appeal. If you stop for a moment, you're dead. The game encourages you to be constantly on the move, taking out enemies as you pass by, flying through the air on launch pads, quickly performing glory kills as you find your next victim. So naturally, if you're looking at what to improve from the first game, eventually someone will figure out, why don't we just give them more movement? The dash isn't anything special. One button press and you shot slightly forward. It's very basic. But working in tandem with the gameplay adds a whole new element to how you move around. I could talk for hours about all the different things you can do with this dash, but we'd be here forever. Hell, I could talk about the platforming for a decent amount of time, which is refreshingly fun. Now you might say, but Kazooie, is a dash really that big of a change? And to that I say fine. If you're not happy with that, then how about this too, huh? That enough movement for you? Despite every game thinking they need a grapple hook, Doom is a game where it works to full effect. Launching towards an enemy to fire a powerful shot, or to build momentum as you swing around the battlefield. These movement options expand upon the original, adding new layers to the game that allow it to stand out on its own. Oh, I didn't mention these monkey bars, did I? Nah, these are pretty cool, I guess. That's not even mentioning the other gameplay changes. The glory kill to gain health, chainsaw for ammo, and flame belch for armor adds a whole new level of strategy that was missing from 2016. Always needing to manage your stats so you can act accordingly. Enemies all have specific weaknesses that you can exploit, making every weapon useful in some way. It doesn't give the player as much freedom, but it certainly adds layers to the game. The second thing a perfect sequel needs is a brand new design. This just means that it should stand apart from its predecessor to be able to have its own identity. At the end of the day, you're making a sequel, not DLC. Rayman Legends is my favorite 2D platformer, period. Although it doesn't divert far from the formula Origins created, with brand new visuals, updated level design, and a brand new tone, it stands apart from the original to create a fresh new experience. Eternal in the same way is virtually unrecognizable from the first game. From the start, you see the main menu of 2016. It is a cluttered mess that I have no idea what they were even going for. You can't even access the options from it, the layout is confusing, it's just atrocious. But Eternal, plain and simple, has your options here and your Slayer here. Very organized. The game is full of color when you compare the two. 2016's HUD was going for a modern sci-fi approach, while Eternal's HUD pops out with its vibrant colors. This arcadey vibe is much more in tune with what Doom is these days. Instead of keeping the same horror vibes from the original, they embraced Doom's video game side and made it what I can only describe as more video gamey. I am a master of words, I know. It all feels like a true homage to old school Doom and the 90s as a whole, with VHS effects and fonts that wouldn't look out of place in a 90s blockbuster. It's truly a way to pay respects to the classic. Enemy designs are simplified, weapons are near copies of the classic Doom ones. Doom 2016 to me is the weird in-between child of Doom 3 and Doom Eternal. It tried to keep the same horror aspect Doom 3 had set, while also bringing back this arcade feel, and while it worked fine enough, Eternal's design feels more cohesive and well thought out. They knew exactly what design choices they wanted to go with, and honestly, taking inspiration from Doom 3 is just... no. Don't do that. The third and final thing a good sequel needs is a bigger scope. And no, I'm not talking about these scopes. Most games aren't brave enough to go big or go home with their original concepts. Making a new IP can be risky, but if that original game is a smash hit, then the sequel should always be bigger, better, and in some cases braver. Portal 2. The first game, while amazing, was very short and basic, so to no one's surprise, after the game's huge success, the sequel hit hard. A longer campaign, a complex story with twists and turns, more ways to play the game. This is how you'd compare the scale of both games. They're not even in the same league. Doom Eternal isn't much longer than the original, but it certainly expands on its scale. Doom 2016 was very simple, cutscenes were very few and far between as well as unskippable. The game only takes place on Mars and Hell, and the story took a backseat for the gameplay. Making Eternal, they then realized, wait, we can just do both. In Eternal, you go to archaic forests, you go to snowy castles. In Doom 2016, you go through portals. In Doom Eternal, you shoot yourself into the surface of Mars.
You can't just shoot a hole into the surface of Mars.
Oh yeah, watch me! Cutscenes are now interesting, giving us an insight into the Slayer's lore and building up this world that we saw very little of in the first game. The Sentinels were hinted at here and there, but now they're the main antagonists, giving a sense of importance to your journey. Besides Earth being invaded, that's really no big deal. There are just so many more interesting things going on here. This single cutscene of all the humans shitting their pants at the sight of you is better than anything 2016 brought us. A third-person view in these cutscenes is also a welcome addition, which brought us the inclusion of skins, so you can now take the game more seriously. In 2016, they wanted to nail the gameplay, and since they did, the sequel gave them room to improve the scale that was so lacking in Doom 2016. And really, that's all a good sequel needs to do. It really isn't that hard, game companies. Oh, come on. It's always going to be a matter of opinion whether a sequel outdoes the original. You don't have to agree that Eternal is better than Doom 2016, but objectively speaking, if a sequel adds something new, builds its own identity, and only serves to improve from its predecessor, then that's all you can really ask of a sequel. If we want to talk about bad sequels, then look no further than Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. Even if you have never played a single Banjo-Kazooie game in your life, if you compare all three games together, you clearly see the odd one out. This would be fine as a standalone game, but as a sequel to Banjo, it just does not work. A good sequel should provide a new fresh experience, but perhaps changing the entire genre is a step too far. Players want something that's familiar and yet fresh. Ironically, Valve is the king of this. Portal 2, Half-Life 2, Team Fortress 2, Left 4 Dead 2. They can't make a trilogy, but these are considered some of the best sequels of all time, and Doom Eternal, in my opinion, is right up there alongside some of these. So, what did we learn today? Put a grapple hook in every game.